Tina, then there was Taco, and now we have another acronym, Big Mac, a play on big midterms are coming. The idea is policy implications from this fall's congressional vote will be a major theme of 2026. Joining us now is Nathan Dean, senior U.S. policy analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. And Nathan, I mentioned this earlier in the show, but one of my kind of favorite things on this was Peter Scher from Academy basically saying, think outside the box. All policy options are on the table. Is that how we should address this, that we could get anything and everything from the White House on affordability in the coming months?
Absolutely. And the key word that you just said there was affordability. I mean, look, that is one of the most important things that American voters are thinking of as we head into November. And we've seen just this past week, President Trump really take steps that are outside the Republican, I'd say, establishment playbook in terms of embracing some, I would just say, Democratic policies to try and get that affordability message through. But the key thing to note is that President Trump doesn't have a lot of power here in terms of trying to get things through Congress. We don't anticipate much legislation happening at all. And so it's really this idea of the bully pulpit, that social media post that comes out and says, look, I want to ban credit card interest at 10% effective January 20th. And there's really no mechanism that he can do that, but it's still forcing industry to respond. And in that case, those credit card bank issuers are still down 6-7% since where we were earlier this week. So certainly something to play in terms of this year is just trying to figure out how do you deal with the bully pulpit portion of the White House, because that message is going to continue throughout 2026.
I wonder about, I was watching Bloomberg surveillance this morning, and John and Anne Marie had a guest talking about the credit card caps and saying, look, that's not going to happen. It's a very low probability that we get a 10% cap on credit card interest. But there is something that legislators are considering right now on swipe fees that's far more important because it's very likely. What is the story with credit card swipe fees, and what are we watching for?
Yeah, so this is called the Credit Card Competition Act. If you've flown through JFK LaGuardia, you may have seen the adverts about this saying, look, this bill will take away reward programs associated with airlines. What this does is it requires additional competition so that if you're a bank, you're required to offer your merchants Visa and another network, MasterCard and another network. Can't be Visa and MasterCard. Now, the idea here is that more competition equals lower fees and less revenue and less, for the banks. And the reason why this is more of a risk than that ban on interest that I talked about earlier is that there's bipartisan warmth to this idea. This is something that Senator Dick Durbin and Senator Roger Marshall have been pushing for many times. Now, we have a 40% chance of success in 2026 on this. We think that there's this unspoken Republican group out there. Think of the bank-allied Republicans in the House Financial Services Committee, for example. They're most likely opposed to this. But as pressure continues on the banks in terms of this idea of affordability, look for more momentum on this. And ultimately, look for both of the bill sponsors here to try and attach this to another piece of legislation. Think maybe the government funding bill at the end of the month. Think of something else rather than going through markup. And the reason why I bring that up is because it can happen almost instantly. You'll get the headlines associated with it, and you'll have headline risk for those bank issuers as well. It's
been endlessly fascinating and in some cases boring, in the case of Bank of America, to see what bank executives have said. And I say boring for Bank of America because the CFO was basically like, we love affordability. We really care about affordability. And on the credit card issue, we will not comment. Nathan, what have you kind of gleaned from what some of the banking executives have said about the credit card business and their willingness to push back against Washington, D.C., or even prepare for changes, whether or not they happen?
So I don't think you're going to see much pushback from the banking industry, specifically against the White House, for two reasons. One, they don't want to get into a spat with President Trump because President Trump has shown that he's willing to use that bully pulpit all the way through the elections, and that's not something the banks want. But there's another angle here. The banks are getting a lot of love right now from the Federal Reserve and the other banking regulators in terms of two proposals that we're anticipating coming out fairly soon, the Basel III Endgame and the G-SIB surcharge. Now, you take all those together, back of the napkin math, plus another rule that they finalized at the end of last year on leverage ratios, you're looking around 60 to 70 billion in returned capital to those largest banks. So even though right now they may not be happy with the White House on the credit card interest and the credit card business, they are going to get capital returns coming from those regulators. And ultimately, I think that's the focus for 2026. So I don't think you're going to see many statements from the banks on the White House social media posts.
Hey, in terms of policy you're watching for, Stephen Kim of ISI this morning was saying when he saw the order on defense companies not to pay dividends or execute share buybacks, he instantly thought of the home builders because they have given back significant money, returned significant cash to shareholders. Do we get something like that on home builders? Does President Trump say you're not allowed to pay dividends and buy shares back either because you're not giving us enough supply?
Absolutely. I mean, look, any industry right now, if it has any ties to affordability, most likely will get some look at from the White House. But let's talk about what can happen in that scenario. So President Trump says, right, home builders, you can't issue dividends. Well, there's nothing he can really do to say says we're going to do that. But there are other ways to influence policy amongst that industry. One, he could say, look, you're not going to do any business with the federal government. All federal contracts, you can't really do that. Or he's going to say, look, we're going to have regulators look at you even further, and we're going to look at your practices here and see. And it's just a headache that the home builders won't want to deal with. So what I think you'll see from the industries that are targeted from the White House is similar to what we saw in the credit card space. The bank said, look, we're not going to, we don't think that there's a law here that will cap credit card interest at 10%. But maybe we can offer a credit card that is capped at 10%. Maybe we can offer a different type of program here. There's different ways of thinking it from the industry perspective. And so these industries have to be careful that they are going to get the focus, but ultimately what their response is going to be is also going to be very important to keep in mind.
I guess it's still giving the president a win of some sorts that he can brag about for the midterms without completely upending their business models. Nathan, so great to have you on. We had you on for a while, even though you're not wearing a vest.
But the sweater is very daddish. To be fair, the V-neck he's America's dad. If you watch Bloomberg Balance of Power, and by the way, how psyched are you to see Tom Tillis on at 5
Very
p.m.
excited.
today? Yeah.
That is the conversation to watch. The congressman who has been pushing back against some of the concerns around Jay Powell. Nathan Dean, thank you so much for joining. Coming up, we're going to bring you part of